Welcome back to part two of our wonderful look at the world of film, chapter 7. And I'm going to be divvying up the history of film into the next two parts. So if you watch this, I'll let you know when we obviously get done with this part and then pick up part 3. But this really is going to be dealing with essentially the era between the beginning of film, which is essentially around 1880 1890 up to about 1920. So I hope that you watch this because I actually have some clips embedded within this lecture, assuming YouTube doesn't take it down, cross my fingers. But if for some reason you see like an awkward like jump cut, it only means that I just had to remove kind of the links out of here, and then you can watch the links separately on Canvas, which I'll provide for you just in case. Okay, in any event, here's the interesting thing about motion pictures, because when we talk about film, we talk about motion pictures. The interesting thing is motion pictures actually don't move. They consist of a series of still images, right, that capture the moving object in progressively different positions. So when stills are run through a projector, at a correct speed, the viewer perceives the illusion of motion, of smooth motion. And so it's something that our brain actually gets tricked into doing, and it's kind of cool because, you know, if we didn't have that ability to be tricked into having stills put through at a fast speed and being able to see motion out of it, we would really never have the beauty of what I call film. All right. Now, film obviously traces its roots back to photography. In the early to mid 19th century, photographs were on plates, but George Eastman developed flexible celluloid roll film that made motion pictures technically feasible. And of course, one of the cool things about, I think, our Media Entertainment Arts Department, MEA, is that a lot of our students who are film students wind up taking classes down in photography on the first floor, because the two do relate to each other when it comes to lighting and exposure and everything. So, you know, if you ever find yourself outside of this MEA 100 online class, actually taking something in person here, by all means, we've got, you know, not only a fantastic film program that actually has hands-on stuff, but you can also do the same thing with photography downstairs. So anyway, I digress. But motion pictures are possible because of two quirks of the human perceptual system. One of them is called the pi phenomenon. The other one is called persistence of vision. Okay. Now the pi phenomenon, I think I've heard someone call it the phi phenomenon, but I think it's called pi, but I could be wrong. Where we see one light source go out while another close to the original is illuminated. And to our eyes, we see motion. So I'll give you an example. If you've ever been or seen like an old Las Vegas marquee, you know, where you see like one light go on, one light go off, one light go on, one light go off, and then it's like maybe surrounding like a sign. Well, it looks like the lights are moving like in a river. Okay, well that's the pi phenomenon. That's our brain not seeing lights on, lights off, lights on, lights off, lights on, lights off. It's actually seeing motion. And so that's obviously something, as we're running film through a projector, that you can get the sense of why we might see motion. All right. The other one is called persistence of vision. And the persistence of vision, the actual definition is that our eyes retain an image for a split second, right? So if we're rapidly presented with one image after the other, the visual persistence of the first image fills in the time lag between the two images. So it seems continuous. So if we are rapidly presented with one image after the other, the visual persistence of the first image fills in the time lag between the two images, so it seems continuous. All right. So one way to think about that is, remember when you were a kid and you saw a flip book, right, where there was like a little cartoon character, and if you flip the pages really quickly, the cartoon character moves. So you would, you know, draw. It's like animators, right? You draw, you know, a stick figure or you know, whatever your rendering is, and then move it ever so slightly, and then again and again and again, and then it just eventually, over like a span of several frames or several pages, it moves. And so that's what persistence of vision is. So my animators know exactly what, you know, what that entails and why that's so critical. Well, so film is a series of still images. So I want to introduce you to our first, what I call significant person in film history and why we essentially have film today. And his name is Edward Muybridge. And I'm about to show you a video here in a second, but let me tell you a little bit about Edward Muybridge real quick, and then we'll see the video. So in 1878, California Governor Leland Stanford, yeah, that you probably recognize the last name, Stanford, right? And his wealthy buddies made a large wager at the time, which was $25,000, over whether a galloping horse's hooves ever left the ground. And so they turned to Edward Muybridge to prove that theory. And so he set up 24 cameras along a racetrack to take still images of this horse running by to see if the horse's hooves ever left the ground. And you know, you can see in a couple of these photos here, in particular here and here, yes, indeed, the horse's hooves came off the ground. Now, why did he settle on 24 images? Because the brain, believe it or not, retains an image for about 1/24 of a second, okay? So therefore, when you have frames are moved at 24 frames per second, people perceive them as actually in motion, all right? So let me play this, let me get this queued up here. And this guy has, has things going on that are completely outside of photography as well, but he's a fascinating character. So give me 2 seconds. I'm going to stop sharing here and share Muybridge. This should work, right? There we go.
When Edward Muybridge began, photography was a relatively new medium. The pioneering photographers of his time had to essentially invent their own cameras and their own chemistry. Muybridge began his career making pictures of Yosemite, taking his bulky camera and portable darkroom through the valley's rough terrain to the high peaks where he could capture the landscape's dramatic heights and plunging chasms. To achieve the shots he wanted, he took his camera out to precipices where his assistants wouldn't dare follow. At this time, a controversy prevailed among experienced horsemen as to whether all the feet of a trotting horse were clear of the ground in the same instant. To settle the debate, the railroad magnate Leland Stanford hired Muybridge to photograph his prize racehorse, Occident, at a trot. Muybridge constructed a track specifically for the purpose. Multiple cameras were lined up, each connected to a wire stretched across the track. As the horse hit each wire, a camera was triggered to capture an instant in time. Horses on merry-go-rounds and an academic painting had long been represented with all feet off the ground, stretched out in front and back. Muybridge's pictures proved something else, that the feet do leave the ground at once, but when they're under the horse's body. These photos caused a great sensation. Meissonier, a celebrated painter of horses, is said to have wept when he saw Muybridge's photographs. It was the first time that such rapid motion could be seen like this, thin slices of time, quicker than anything the human eye could perceive. Muybridge experimented with the optical gadgets of the time, the zoetrope, thaumatrope, and phenakistoscope, and he created something he called the zoopraxiscope, a precursor to cinema. It showed his still images in rapid sequence, reanimating the still photos, and cast the image on a wall. Some would say that the only thing lacking was the sound of the hooves pounding the ground, or they would have believed that horses were really running through the room. His work required him to travel extensively. When he'd been away from San Francisco for a time, he returned to find that his wife, Flora, had been conducting an affair with the local theater critic, Harry Larkins. Stricken, Muybridge got on a ferry, went to Calistoga where the lover was hiding, and shot Larkins dead. He was put on trial for murder. If found guilty, he would go to the gallows. His attorney mounted an imaginative defense, with friends and associates offering examples of Muybridge's benign madness. The attorney introduced pictures from Yosemite, showing Muybridge perched at a precarious height, as evidence of the photographer's questionable mental state. The jury pronounced Edward Muybridge not guilty and not mad. He would live to create hundreds more of the motion studies of people performing various tasks and movements, of horses and other animals. His innovations in photographic technology formed the very foundation of cinema. Every movie you see today, and every animation, owes something to the legacy of Edward Muybridge.
So there is a story of Edward Muybridge, very fascinating character in history and film history. A lot of people don't know about him, but yeah. So anytime you see a film, think of him, because he really does have a major part in what we appreciate and enjoy today. All right, another big name in the industry, Thomas Edison. Yes, he is back, right? Remember him, in your chapter from Sound, right? In the recording chapter where he, created a dictating device that later became the phonograph, which later became the record player, which later became recorded music. Well, Thomas Edison also was dabbling in the world of film as well. And so he and an assistant actually developed a reliable projection system, but Edison was too cheap to spend $150 to patent his idea. So machines were quickly duplicated and patented in Europe. So Thomas Edison came up with the kinetoscope, which basically, rather than patent it, winds up being duplicated in Europe. That is important because we're going to talk Edison is going to be a big part of film history, and that lack of patenting something here internationally is going to lead to something much, much grander coming up. So hang tight with Edison. Now, as far as Edison's original invention, he created the kinetoscope, which pulled flexible film through the camera for a nickel. A single viewer could turn a crank, look inside the machine, and see a brief film on a small screen. So here's the deal with Edison, right? He did not see his projecting his image to large crowds, but rather one person at a time. So again, in sound, saw it as a dictating device, as an answering machine, right? Did not see it becoming a mass medium record, player, right? In this case, he did not see his invention becoming something that would cast a huge image on a wall or a screen and become what film has now become today. So I think that's very fascinating. His business model was flawed. That doesn't mean that he didn't have a big part in film history, though, because that's coming up. So in any event, during the late 1880s and 1890s, several crude motion picture cameras were under development. In 1895, a pair of brothers, the Lumiere brothers, come up with their first film, right? And here is the link, by the way. I'm going to try to play it for you. And again, if for some reason you see an awkward jump here in the lecture, it's because I had to take it out. But anyway, the Lumiere brothers in Europe created what is arguably the first film. Right? A lot of people argue this is really kind of the first film. Now, I use air quotes with film because I want to show this to you. And this is one of those things where I wish we could discuss this in real time, because I think when you see this, you're going to see some issues, which I will point out after we show this to you. So anyway, this is called The Arrival of a Train in the Station. That's kind of generally what this sentence in French means. So here we go. Now that is All it is, it's literally a train arriving at a station. The music, if you had been alive back in this theater in 1895, the music would have been playing live. There was no soundtrack or music to accompany the film. It was always done live. Here's the thing. I read this in another textbook, guys. So when audiences saw this originally for the first time, they were some of them were diving under the seats because they were convinced that the train was coming through the front of the room and into the room itself. Again, mind-blowing because no one had ever seen motion on screen before. And so, I don't know, think back to a time where you saw something that was technologically amazing for the first time. What would your reaction be? So now what it's lacking is a plot, right? What it's lacking is editing. What it's lacking is close-ups. What it's lacking is everything that we see in film today. Those are things that have to slowly develop or evolve over time with different filmmakers. And so we're about to run through that here in a minute. But yeah, that's all it is. It was basically someone positioning a camera in front of a train arriving at a station, and that was it. So there was no story there. But that was innovative at the time, if you will. All right, back to the lecture here. Okay, now it obviously, before we get to Edwin S. Porter, let me mention here that early movies consisted of just motion, right? Acrobats tumbling, horses running, jugglers juggling. That was kind of how we were just fascinated with motion, but we're human, right? And one of the things that we want to like experience is a story. And again, audiences at this time, at the end of the 19th century, were used to live theater. So there were plays that were going on, there was storytelling that was going on, and people were eager to kind of start seeing that on what you call the big screen. So, but the problem was technologically we were limited. So the first early films ran just 1 minute to 2 minutes. And then you start to see some longer films start to appear. By 1903, both American and European producers were making what are called one-reelers, R-E-E-L-E-R-S, reelers, that lasted 10 to 12 minutes. And that soon evolved into two-reelers, right? And these short films actually told an actual story, okay? These films included A Trip to the Moon and the one in front of you here, The Great Train Robbery, which, by the way, Edwin S. Porter made this in 1903. It's right in front of me. In 1903, and basically this is considered the first Western and the first action movie ever made. 1903's Great Train Robbery. I'm going to share a little bit of you. And when you see this, try to compare it to what we just saw with the train arriving at a station. And again, if for some reason we get taken down because it's copyrighted, you'll see an awkward jump here, but you can always, I will also include the link if that happens on Canvas. So here we go. Great Train Robbery, Edwin S. Porter. And I'm going to flip over to the next one here. You should see this. Here we go. Not going to play all 10 minutes of this, by the way. Just the first couple minutes. By the way, Edwin S. Porter also did a lot of low shooting, which was innovative at the time. Right now we have something going on, right? New York is being robbed. That's really well done. There we go. About a minute into the film, and we're still essentially on the same shot, but we're going to see an edit here. Close the door. Here's the edit. Now we're outside. It's 12. We have 2 edits now this entire film. And of course, they're about to get on the train here. But we have a story. It's a basic story. But, you know, compare this obviously to today when you watch any kind of action film and how quickly that film moves along from a sequence standpoint. This is 1903, right? The train starts moving. Robbers are on the train. We're about to see our next edit at 1:49 into the film. He's got money. Oh, he hears something going on. Probably gunshots. Locking away. Oh, there they go. They're blasting and kicking their way down the door here. Shootout ensues. And we get the spin of death here. There we go. In any event, I'm going to stop it here because we're about 2 minutes in, but you can see that this is 1903, Edwin S. Porter. This is an actual story that's unfolding on film in front of us. And although it is moving at a snail's pace compared to how we normally watch a film, it is indeed a major step in in the evolution of storytelling and narrative in the film universe. All right. So anyway, Edwin S. Porter, camera placement, editing, all of those things he brought to the table for the very first time. So bottom line is all of these films became very popular. Someone figured out that you could actually, this is again, at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century. So someone figured out you could rent a film at a vacant store, add some cheap decorations, install folding chairs, buy a projector, a piano, and a screen, and open for business. Okay. So the charge was 5 cents for admission. The theater was called a Nickelodeon. So suddenly the idea of showing films became big business, right? And again, these films were all very short. Again, 12 minutes long. And there was a lot of high turnover within those films. And what's another fascinating little thing that you'll never read in the textbook, and so I'm hoping you're watching me, is that there is a film preservation center right next to COC that basically had a chance to tour. They have some of the most priceless works on planet Earth that they store in these like temperature controlled vaults that, if you dropped a bomb over the thing, they would still be preserved, because that's how important it is to preserve culture and film. But anyway, the curator over there years ago told me that we have lost films that were made from basically around Edwin S. Porter's time to the mid 1920s. We've lost about 85% of those films have been lost forever. They've been, they just disappeared. They did, because they were made of, that chemical with film. They just, disintegrated. But anyway, 85%. So very, very sad. So anyway, back to the Nickelodeon. First investors made $1,000 a week. By 1906, 1,000 were in operation. And by 1910, 10,000 were showing films with an estimated gross of $91 million. And that is $91 million in 1910 terms. So you can tell that Hollywood just basically exploded out of the gate. Not Hollywood, but just because we're going to talk about why Hollywood started. But the idea of the film industry absolutely exploded around the turn of the century, right? Most early theaters, by the way, were in hearts of the northeastern industrial cities made for immigrants. It didn't matter that folks who had emigrated from Europe, right, who didn't speak the language, this was actually an appealing form of mass communication, because you could watch what was transpiring on screen. You didn't necessarily have, and this is pre-dialogue, right? So maybe there might have been words that were posted on graphics that kind of told you about what was happening plot-wise, but for the most part, it was happening right in front of you without dialogue. It was just music and film. And so even if you don't speak the language of something, you can still kind of try to figure out the plot. It's actually something I do kind of in a geek move, I will say, is I love watching foreign films and sometimes trying to turn off the closed captioning so I can try to figure out what's happening, even though I don't speak a lick of the language. So, but anyway, film was an ideal, the idea of film being sort of evolving at the same time that we had mass immigration here in the United States at the end of the 19th, early 20th century. It was like a perfect storm. So anyway, early films showed stereotypical plots, over dramatized acting as the spin, right? slapstick humor, and it was geared toward the less educated, at least early film was. But like the audience, the film industry evolved to appeal to the middle class. Theaters were built in better neighborhoods. Movie palaces opened in the business districts. Movie makers produced longer, more sophisticated films to exhibit in such improved surroundings. And by 1914, 40 million patrons studied, or I should not say studied, well, maybe they did study it, but they attended movies weekly, which leads us, if I can speak today, to our next significant film. And oh man, there's so many layers to Birth of a Nation, which came out in 1915. So first of all, it was made by American director D.W. Griffith. It was literally the most popular film ever made until Gone with the Wind knocked it off in 1939. So it made a tremendous amount of money. It was as many say, it was a brilliant Civil War drama, right? But what was so significant about it? Well, there's lots of layers. First of all, the positive, and then there's the negative. The positive is it established film as an art form, okay? Another positive is that it was the first feature-length film of over 60 minutes. It ran 3 hours. It was 15 weeks to produce. It is considered the most influential silent film ever made. It used all sorts of innovative, or I should say Griffith invented all sorts of innovative techniques in terms of editing and close-ups. Every single film that you see today has its evolution, has its roots in this film. But here comes the but, right? By the way, before I get to the but, it was the most expensive movie to make of its time, $110,000. It was shot without a script. It introduced history as a film topic. Hint, hint, it introduced history as a film topic. Griffith spent 6 weeks with rehearsal, another 9 weeks shooting the film. Again, as I say, the movie used editing, simultaneous action, close-ups. It was distributed to theaters complete with an orchestral music score. Admission was $3. This is back during World War I. And again, as I said, the most popular film until Gone with the Wind. Okay, here's the but. The but is it was racist and controversial. Why? Because it was told, it flipped the script, if you will. Civil War drama, it portrayed the South as the protagonist and the North and the soldiers invading the South, in its words, as the antagonist, okay? So basically it portrayed the Ku Klux Klan as the hero, and the folks that were trying to essentially end the Civil War from the North, which was against slavery, if you will, of course, as the bad guys. Imagine that, right? You can't even fathom that in 2022, but this is 1915. This is only 50 or 60 years after the Civil War ended. Our, basically our viewpoint of racism and racial politics, far different than it was today. This was 100 years ago. So keep that in mind. Not saying it's right, just saying it's fact, it's history. So I want to show you a quick scene here. Again, if it gets taken down, you'll know why this is a quick cut, but hopefully it'll let us do this. And I want you, as you watch this, and we're only going to watch the first minute or two of the actual clip here. I want you guys to see how often we have editing, and I'll try to kind of describe this to you as we go. So again, we don't have audio dialogue yet. That hasn't happened, but we do have a soundtrack. So like anything during this era, there's always a slate. Okay, so here we have our establishing shot. We have a cutaway. You could even say that's a close-up. It's simultaneous action, meaning as we watch this, we make the assumption that the women are walking at the same time. People are coming in, warning of danger, coming to town. The women go to the door. Oh, let us in, danger, danger. So we know that something's happening. Here comes another cutaway of the troops advancing. Dad coming to the door to let them in. Numerous editing here, numerous close-ups, right? You know that this is happening outside simultaneously to what's happening inside with the dad and the two women. And this is D.W. Griffith, right? This is what he brought in terms of style and innovation to the film universe. This hadn't happened yet. And so, yeah, we can sit here and obviously talk about the plot being, of course, completely culturally, opposite to what we believe now, right, in 2022. But the fact is that he did bring a lot of innovation to the film universe. So anyway, read up on Birth of a Nation. It's a fascinating topic for so many reasons. But let us move on. So I have Charlie Chaplin on the screen, and we're going to circle to Charlie Chaplin here in just a minute. But let me tell you a backstory on why Charlie Chaplin's on the screen here. So let's go back to Thomas Edison. Okay. I'm sorry. Let me even back up even further. Between 1908 and 1918, the center of the film industry moved from the East Coast to the West Coast, and it has something to do with Charlie Chaplin. I promise. Okay. There was a tremendous demand for new pictures, which brought enormous competition. And if we circle back to Thomas Edison, after he had created and invented his, his kinetoscope, he stayed very much involved in the film business. Now, he might not have initially have been right about what he was creating, nor was he correct on the patent. So what happens is that Thomas Edison founded the Motion Picture Patents Company, or MPPC for short. So the new clique was limited to the 10 biggest film companies on the East Coast, by the way, who held the patents to virtually all existing filmmaking and exhibition equipment in the United States. Again, I'll underline in the United States. It ran the production and distribution of film in the United States. There's a reason that you had films that were 12 minutes long, or maybe, maybe double that, but not much longer, because the MPPC wanted to essentially control it. It downplayed actors. It gave no screen credit. It didn't want to pay larger salaries. It wanted to tax theater owners and ensure owners were using projection equipment supplied by the MPPC. It wanted to stay in the Nickelodeon model, basically, because they thought that that was the most profitable way. But you had the other side, independent producers, who were pushing back against that notion and thought that there should be a different, way to make money in Hollywood, or I should say the way Hollywood does it now. So what did they do? They moved west. They moved out here to Hollywood. How did they do it? How did they get around Chaplin and his group's monopoly? Well, they turned to European equipment. And so they basically, because that was not patented here in the US, remember? Chaplin. Edison screwed that up in the late 19th century. So using European equipment, they moved to the West Coast, and rather than downplay actors, they actually made people want to watch films that had their favorite actors in the film. So they made actors the focal point of the marketing campaign for as to why you'd want to see a film. So they quickly recognized celebrity could mean dollars. So Charlie Chaplin, there he is, and Mary Pickford were two of the early big names in the industry. When they were part of Edison's group on the East Coast, Chaplin, for example, was paid $150 a week. And that was in 1913. By 1917, after moving west and becoming part of this new independent group, he was getting paid $1 million for 8 pictures. Pickford's climbed from $1,000 a week to $20,000 a week, and 50% of her film's profits. In fact, they were so wealthy that in 1919, Chaplin and Pickford unified and created United Artists. Adolph Zucker created Paramount Studios, which combined production and distribution functions into one corporate structure. All right. And now you start to see film genre kind of branch out. It goes, we start seeing Westerns, war, horror, romance, physical comedy, costume drama, drama, action, adventure, and one last genre that was brand new is the documentary, which obviously relates to your documentary assignment. So if you're still listening here, which I hope you are, then you should definitely look at your documentary assignment because that is something that I appreciate as being a lover of film and a lover of journalism. I think documentaries combine both. But anyway, Nanook of the North, you guys can click on the link if you like. It was considered the first feature-length documentary. It was made in 1922 by Robert J. Flaherty. It featured the Inuit tribe in Quebec. There's some criticisms of the film because some of the stuff was staged. Well, I think that's there are times where even in modern documentary, you see the same criticisms come up. But anyway, so that is a look at part one of film history. Part two will be coming up in the next YouTube video. In the meantime, feel free to go back and look at some of the links. And if you're interested in anything that I've talked about here in part one, by all means, there's all sorts of information out there, all sorts of wormholes you can go down on Google. So anyway, that's it for part two. Or I should say part one of history. This is the second, I guess, technically the second part of your YouTube lectures in this Canvas module. I will have part three shortly for you, or when you click on it. All right, take care.